One night I'd sort of overdone it on the enlivening drugs, and I couldn't get to sleep. I hadn't meant to overdo it. I had simply underestimated the quality of the cocaine that I had taken. I knew I had to get up for work the following morning, so I took a couple of sleeping tablets. After about 10 minutes, they hadn't worked, so I took a couple more. And still my head was buzzing. So in desperation, thinking of how badly I needed my sleep, thinking of how alert I had to be at work, I took another 2 or 3. I eventually got to sleep. A lovely, deep sleep. So lovely and deep that when the morning came and my alarm clock went off, I neglected to wake up. Bridget, my flatmate, knocked on my door, then came into my room and shouted at me, then shook me, then, at her wit's end, slapped me. I didn't really buy the wit's end bit. She must have known that slapping wouldn't wake me, but no one is in good form on a Monday morning. Then Bridget stumbled across a piece of paper that I'd been attempting to write on just before I fell asleep. It was just the usual maudlin, mawkish, self-indulgent poetry-style rubbish I often wrote when I was under the influence. Stuff that seemed really profound at the time, but that caused me to blush with shame when I read it in the cold light of day. The bits that I could read, that is. The poem went something like, mumble, mumble, life, something indecipherable, bowl of cherries, mumble, all I get is the pits. Then, and I vaguely remembered writing this bit, I thought of a really good title for a poem about a shoplifter who had suddenly discovered her conscience. It was called I Can't Take Any More. But Bridget, who'd recently gone all weird and uptight, didn't treat it as the load of cringe-making rubbish it so clearly was. Instead, when she saw the empty jar of sleeping tablets rolling around in my pillow, she decided it was a suicide note. And before I knew it, and it really was before I knew it because I was still asleep, well, asleep or unconscious, depending on whose version of the story you believe, she had rung for an ambulance, and I was in Mount Solomon having my stomach pumped. That was unpleasant enough, but there was worse to come. Bridget had obviously turned into one of those New York abstention fascists, the type who, if you wash your hair with Linko beer shampoo more than twice a week, say that you're an alcoholic and that you should be on a 12-step programme. So she rang my parents in Dublin and told them that I had a serious drug problem and that I'd just tried to kill myself. And before I could intervene and explain that it had all been an embarrassing misunderstanding, my parents had rung my painfully well-behaved older sister Margaret, who arrived on the first available flight from Chicago with her equally painful husband Paul. Margaret was only a year older than me, but it felt more like 40. She was intent on ferrying me to Ireland to the bosom of my family, where I would stay briefly before being admitted to some Betty Ford-type place to sort me out for good and for all, as my father said when he rang me. Of course, I had no intention of going anywhere, but by then I was really frightened. And not just by the talk of going home to Ireland and into a clinic, but because my father had rung me. He had rung me. That had never happened in the whole of my 27 years. It was hard enough to get him to say hello whenever I rang home, and it was one of the rare occasions when he answered the phone. The most he ever managed was, "Which one of you is that? Oh, Rachel, hold on till I get your mother." Then there was nothing except banging and bashing as he dropped the phone and rang to get Mum. And if Mum wasn't there, he was terrified. "Your mother's not here," he always said, his voice high with alarm, the subtext being, "Please, please don't let me have to talk to you." Not because he didn't like me or was a cold, unapproachable father or anything like that. He was a lovely man. I could grudgingly admit that by the time I was 27 and had lived away from home for 8 years. That he wasn't the great withholder of money for new jeans that my sisters and I loved to hate during our teens. But despite Dad's lovely manness, he wasn't big on conversation, not unless I wanted to talk about golf. So the fact that he had rung me must have meant that I'd really messed up this time. Fearfully I tried to set things right. "There's nothing wrong with me," I told Dad. "It's all been a mistake and I'm fine." But he was having none of it. "You're to come home," he ordered. I was having none of it either. "Dad, behave yourself. Be realistic here. I can't just walk out."